And the final story that we covered this week has to do with Hawaii, specifically the city of Honolulu, and how they're handling people that are applying to be able to purchase firearms. If you want to tell us what the situation is over there right now.
Yeah, I mean, Honolulu has gotten most of the attention here, likely because it's the largest city in the state, the largest county in the state as well. But it does seem to apply. It does seem to be a situation that's happening across the state. But effectively, gun sales and gun carry permitting are cut off right now, and will be for at least another week or two at the very least, it appears, because of sort of negligence in implementing the state's new Bruin response law, which includes reforms to their gun safety licensing program. So, instruct in Hawaii to buy a gun at all, any gun, unlike other states where this is usually, even in the strictest states, this only applies to handguns and most of the time. But in Hawaii, it applies to long guns as well, shotguns and rifles. In addition to handguns, it's really all guns. You need a purchase permit. But to get that permit, like the concealed carry permit, which is obviously a more common requirement for concealed carry permits, you need to have a state-approved training course that you've completed. And the problem is that these counties in Hawaii haven't updated their certification programs to match this new state law yet. And the state law goes into effect in January, but also these purchase permits are only valid for, I believe, 2 weeks. So Honolulu has stopped issuing them now because they don't want to issue the permits that would be valid beyond when when this law change happens. And they also don't have that new certification process in place for instructors yet. Their hearing for this isn't until January 9th. And then from there, it would take another 10 days at least for the new rules to be finalized, at least. And so, yeah, I mean, they stopped issuing permits, it sounds like, on December 18th, and they're not going to be issuing them again, perhaps for as many as 40 days beyond January 1st, because that's the new law gives them 40 days to process these applications anyway. And the city attorney has said their plan is to be able to comply with that. But that means effectively gun sales there have been cut off and will be cut off for at least a while longer, because you can't get the training that's required to get the permit because there's no certified instructors at this point,
right,
under the new law. So you can sort of see this catch-22 situation that has devolved into essentially a gun sales ban.
Yeah. And you wrote an interesting members piece about why, because obviously a total gun sales ban is bound to raise some constitutional questions, right? Because it's obviously a Second Amendment right being deprived. But you wrote an interesting analysis piece about why it's not going to be so easy to try to resolve those constitutional questions just based on how the courts work and how our legal standards work for challenging these types of things.
Yeah, that's so, when we broke news of this, and we were the first ones to report on this, there was a lot of reaction of like, oh, well, there's going to be lawsuits, and this is obviously a Second Amendment violation, and Honolulu and Hawaii, these other counties, are going to have trouble in court. And it's very obvious why people would think that, because it's an extremely straightforward Second Amendment violation here to just basically make it impossible for somebody to legally purchase a gun in the state. The problem is challenging that is more complicated than you might think because of the nature of what's going on here. For instance, this new state law, this Bruin response law, we've talked a lot about Bruin response laws. I believe we covered this when they passed it at the time. It's very similar to the other ones out there in California or New Jersey or New York or Massachusetts, the other places that have passed these sorts of things after the Supreme Court's Bruin decision. And that's being challenged by Alan Beck, who's a gun rights lawyer who does almost all of the gun rights challenges in Hawaii. Hawaii is a very small state, obviously. So this is sort of starts with one of the problems. It's a small state. It doesn't have a very vibrant gun culture in the sense that not a lot of people own guns there. There are not a lot of gun rights activists. They do exist. The Hawaii Firearms Coalition is the group that brought the situation to the public's attention, that, these sales are cut off. And there just aren't, a lot of lawyers there challenging these sorts of things. Alan Beck is almost the only one, and he's not even backed by any of the major gun rights groups, not directly. He doesn't work for any of them. And so you have a place where there aren't a lot of people to challenge this law. There aren't a lot of lawyers to take up those challenges. And the other half of it is it's hard to fight a situation like this where the harm is caused by more negligence than intention. And it, in theory, at least, one of the big factors as to whether or not there's going to be a lawsuit is how long this drags out. If they actually get things done in a relatively quick manner and start issuing permits again relatively soon, there's not going to be a lawsuit. I'll just say that, because there won't be anything to challenge on at that point. It'll become moot as soon as they actually start this process back up again, which they seem intent on actually doing. They're just kind of being lazy about it. Like, they knew this change was coming. They just didn't go through the process of adopting new rules and everything in a timely manner. So now there's this gun sales cutoff because of that. Now, it's not cut off because the state law cuts it off. There is a path in the state law to being able to buy these guns or get the carry permits. It's incompetence or negligence in implementing those rules you'd have to sue the local authorities, not the state. So you'd have to sue across the state, these different jurisdictions. You'd have to find different plaintiffs. You'd have to find, so that's a complication, not one that's impossible to overcome. Then you'd have to get a suit filed pretty quick, and you'd have to get a judge to act quickly. And there's a number of reasons why that might not happen. Like, judges generally, even if they ideologically are on the more conservative end of the spectrum, even if they're liberal on the ideological end, they both tend to be the federal judiciary tends to be conservative in a broader sense than that, like in a legal sense. They're not eager to go in and disrupt what the elected officials are doing unless they feel they have to. And so if you take a case that involves them dragging their feet or basically sales being cut off due to incompetence rather than intention, it's much harder for you to get a judge to order something if the officials can make the case that they're trying to fix this or they're going to fix this without the judge getting involved. And also, it takes a while for the courts to work. And so if things resolve themselves in a couple of weeks, you file this case, you spend the money, you're unlikely to actually win because it'll be moot by the time the court even gets around to doing something, to reading briefs on the matter. It would take a while to write an opinion on something like this. That all takes time. And, a right delayed is a right denied. And so it shouldn't matter under the legal standard. But in practice, I think it will. And plus, Hawaii's in the Ninth Circuit. You're unlikely to find a friendly judge there anyway. So on top of that sort of deference to elected officials whenever possible, you also are probably going to have to deal with a judge who's ideologically opposed to what you're trying to do. Now they still, I think even a liberal judge is going to understand that you can't just cut off gun sales completely. And so eventually they would act, but it's in real life that you're probably going to have a delay of months for a suit to really become viable. Now you can do other things like sue for nominal damages, sue for $1 worth of damages. Because that's the other part. It's like somebody not being able to buy a gun is obviously being harmed. Their rights are being infringed on, but they're not facing necessarily like monetary damages from that fact. No, maybe something happens where that you could come into play, but most people are not going to face any sort of monetary damage from not being able to buy a gun. Now the FFLs might have a stronger case because maybe they're losing out on money. Although even there, you'd have to show that there are damages and not just delayed sales or something along those lines. So, I guess at the end of the day, mootness is the biggest problem that you face in challenging something like this, even something as straightforward as a total blocking of gun sales. If it's short enough period of time and it happens in a place where not a lot of people are affected because it's a small jurisdiction, it can, in practice, be very difficult to actually win a suit there, and it'd be expensive to try if you're not sure that this is going to last long enough for you to actually win, if that makes sense, because you won't get your lawyer's fees back if the case gets mooted. I mean, even if you do something like nominal damages and the case goes on for a couple of years and you win in the end, a judge is unlikely to give you full lawyer's fees for something like that, especially if the issue was resolved relatively quickly, the actual practical problem. And then the court case just naturally takes a long time after that. The judge may not. I think usually in those cases, they don't give a full award of legal fees. So you're out a lot of money. I don't know. So those are some of the practical issues. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Doesn't mean you couldn't win. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just noting that a lot of people, I think, assume this is going to end up in court immediately. And I think that's unlikely.